Hey guys, welcome back. Time to paint again. And today we've got something really special. We've got Ruglud. Well, not Ruglud, but from Ruglud's Armored Orcs, the Dogs of War regiment. We have Ruglud's boss actually. This guy's name is Gudruk. Specifically, his name is Gudruk Bone Chewer. So that kind of makes Ruglud's Armored Orcs kind of oddly named, right? Because they ended up being named for their champion rather than for their chief. Which I guess, insofar as he's a unit's permanent leader, that kind of makes sense. I don't know. But it made sense if it was Gudruk's Armored Orcs, to be perfectly honest. But yeah. So we've got this model way back when from 1987. This is one of the Adam's, I think one of his most enduring sculpts. There was only one attempt to try to reboot this model and this series for the Dogs of War range that came a little bit later on. And in that version, I think the style was very much closer to what Brian Nelson had. So a lot more hunchbacks and a lot more lower jaw as opposed to just skull-like visage, I suppose. Gudruk, as we are painting over here, goes on to be sold with that box of Armored Orcs back in 1987. And I think he's the most iconic sculpt from that box because he really makes a splash with his appearance. He's got a gigantic, extremely dramatic mouth. In fact, I have memories of a particular Citadel painting guide that made reference to how you could use additional shading inside of a model's mouth to make it more dramatic. And for the example, they used specifically this exact model, Gudruk Bone Chewer. Yeah. So he was a level 10 hero, bearing in mind that this is, I think, 2nd edition. So back then, heroes could go to really high levels because I think the idea was that they were supposed to mimic D&D heroes to a certain extent. So at least have that kind of level scaling so that you could reference back and forth between the two game systems. So yeah, Gudruk, what's his name again? Gudruk Bone Chewer. Yeah, that doesn't quite roll off the tongue as Ruglud's Armored Orcs, does it? Anyway, Gudruk was a hero who, like the chief of his little tribe, and together with his warband, they are moving through a pass that had recently been pillaged by Chaos troops. So the goblin and orc defenders of that valley had taken up last stand positions. And as Gudruk and his tribe was moving through, they started firing upon anybody who came within range, probably scared out of their wits by Chaos troopers and their constant terror attacks. So eventually, Gudruk and friends eventually kind of decide that the only way that they're going to survive the friendly fire is by essentially either finding a sneaky way to camouflage themselves, which they're not particularly good at, or else the more obvious way is to kind of dress in some of the leftover Chaos equipment left behind from earlier skirmishes. A fair number of the Chaos Warriors had been defeated earlier because it was in fact the scene of a battle, of a hard-fought battle before Chaos took the upper hand. So there were plenty of Chaos Warriors dead on the battlefield to loot. And so they decide to help themselves to the armor so that, they might avoid the outrageous slings and arrows of their friends and survive to make their way through the valley. So, interesting little story. I guess what comes out of this to me really is the idea that orcs have the ingenuity to consider their own self-preservation, which is kind of nice. But also the idea that orcs would not actually make a lot of their own armor. Certainly, orcs tend to be portrayed at a technology level that seems below, most other races. They have a tendency to kind of just loot equipment and carry it around, which is kind of a nice touch, I guess. Even this early in the process, orcs were already having quite a bit of their personality as looters. So this appeals to me greatly. In particular, what I really like about this model, Gudruk, is the fact that he's kind of dressed in very distinctively Chaos-looking armor with these steep angular shoulder pads, which I'm going to be picking out in Flesh Terrace Red because I just think that's a really iconic corn-like color. Flesh as usual for orcs is what is it? It's Striking Scorpions green, which is a nice vibrant green, which I think, you know, provides a really like bright and vibrant base that echoes the models of this period. And I guess the really nice thing about it is that we can then come in and shade it down further if it's a hero, or we can add additional highlights if he's just a weedy goblin. So in that sense, this base color goes on to inform the way we can address that kind of hierarchical nature within Orc society. Very appropriate because we want the Orcs to look tougher and weedier, tougher and harder, for them to have slightly darker skin tones, and to keep the lighter colors for the weedier goblins. Really, really pleasing in that result, in that sense. Okay, so we are coming right in with Flesh Terrace Red. And Flesh Terrace Red is kind of a, I guess it's a more purple. It's a more yeah, it's definitely got a bit more like magenta in it. It's actually a really nice color. It's got lots of intensity, covers really well, and as you can see, it creates a red that has a different personality to the regular Orc red, which is the whole intention of this, because what we are looking at is an Orc cosplaying as a Chaos Warrior essentially. So the idea that he looks a little bit wrong is kind of central to understanding the storyline behind this Regiment of Renown. So this color, in my opinion, is perfect for this. We can come back in and apply a bit of a highlight to the edges using a red, the same traditional red that we use for most Orc and Goblin equipment, but I think the idea would be to keep it very, very concentrated on the tips so that it doesn't change the overall feel of this deeper, more malevolent, I would say, chaos style of equipment color. So let's not get our wires crossed on that and keep the story clear and front and center. I really like the way these models look. I think they've kind of got a bit of flair to them. The rest of the unit isn't quite as iconic as Gudruk himself, unfortunately, but Gudruk himself for sure is a real standout. So there are some areas that I want to leave because they're a little bit too close to the green, so we just put that aside for now, and we can jump right into the extensive amount of silver that he has all over him, because he is indeed an armored orc. So his scimitars, which are pretty impressive looking, crossed over his head in the insane YMCA kind of pose, a real hallmark of models of this period. Just about every range, I believe, had a model, some kind of a nutter waving his weapons overhead like this. They really helped to stand out in the press of battle, and that really looked good in my opinion. A lot of the early Wood Elves also had this like pose, you know, where any race that I suppose that was designed to look a little bit more feral did well by this pose. So you'll notice that the shield that I'm using is not a period appropriate shield. At this point, most of the shields would have been done by Marauder. Most of the detailed shields, that is. I'm not too crazy about it. That era of shields, or the ones that went before, which were the shields that had the holes in the center, through which the boss that was mounted on the back of the miniature, sculpted onto the back of the miniature, a boss being that protrusion, was supposed to pass through that hole and keep the shield in place. I think one really interesting bit of information was that at the time there was very much the idea that shields breaking off miniatures was a very pressing concern for people who wanted to encourage you to collect gigantic armies of orcs and other unsavory creatures. The idea that when you've got like 50 miniatures and then one of them has the shield kind of snap off his back, that kind of bad feels. Citadel very much wanted to avoid at the time, so this design of shield wherein you had a protrusion through which you could pass through a hole in the shield made it so that, well, you could keep the shield on without it breaking regularly. The downside, on the other hand, is that those shields don't really work with any other kind of design, right? Because so long as you had a miniature with, you know, lacking that boss sticking out, it becomes a lot harder to mount on any other miniature. And even though those shields came in really rather interesting shapes, which which I would have loved to use. Unfortunately, I can't use them because they have that hole in the center. I guess what I could do if I really wanted to is sculpt on or otherwise add on some kind of a little like a separate metal boss over which you can glue over that hole in the center to cover it up. Might be a good way to add a bit of variation into the poses and keep some of these iconic, pieces of kit in the range. But between you and I, honestly, I prefer Marauder's range of sculpted shields anyway. I think they have a lot of individual personality and they add a lot to the range. Today, however, we are using one of the 6th edition plastic Orcs shields, mostly because I really like this shape and this design for Orcs. It kind of has that brutishness and that combination of weight and size that kind of really suits the Orc miniatures from any edition really well. And I'm really pleased to be using it on this model. I had to have a bit of a rummage through my bits box to find some of these shields that hadn't yet been used for some of my other Orc armies, well, Orc regiments. And I was really pleased to find this one that was unused, a spare lying around at the bottom of the bits box. So sometimes these things do work out. Never throw anything away, huh? So, okay, cool. I am going to come in and do these funny little rondelles. Oddly enough, the rondelle on his left, is kind of missing the lower half. And I think this might have been a casting error that occurs in almost all of this entire range of miniatures. For some reason, this side, which is a lot rounder, is complete. This one is lacking the lower half of his jaw, unfortunately. And although I was tempted to fix it by sculpting it in, I kind of felt that it might be a better idea to sort of stick with the original, if not intention, then the original version that kind of made its way into the public. Since these models that I'm painting are meant to be a bit of a throwback anyway, it felt better to just leave things as is, I suppose, rather than try to make them perfect. Let's just paint them the way they were presented to the public back then. Now, he seems to have a top knot of some extent. Anybody who knows their Orc fluff will know that this is absolute heresy, because unless that is a very curiously shaped hair squig, we know that all Orcs are indeed bald. So it's just a very specific, I guess, reminder that this model predates the stories about hair squigs. In fact, I think hair squigs were more of a 40k thing. And only sort of really crept their way into Warhammer Fantasy a little bit later on. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I believe that to be the case. Most of the stories that I read growing up involved Orcs in the 40k universe, the 40k setting, I suppose. Having hair squigs, not so much fantasy Orcs. Fantasy Orcs, for the most part, seem to be fairly down-to-earth, regular old Orcs. Very Tolkien-esque. Not particularly savage, not very bright in a comical way rather than in a brutish and evil sort of way. More like wayward children rather than, really dangerous opponents. But there you go. I guess they were possessed of a kind of low cunning and a little bit of sort of like a mean streak, I suppose. But not so much anything, beyond that. They certainly didn't have grand designs other than to go crump the Humies every now and then. So in that sense, they have been quite consistent with their original form. Okay, so that silver has been blocked in. He has a rather large and impressive open mouth. For that, I think I will drop in some of this Magos purple. I think the purple works really well with the green to create, a really dramatically shaded mouth, just like that article said all those years ago. And I think that's a really nice color for his tongue as well. So this won't be the only time that we're painting the interior of his mouth, because I think, as much as I like the fact that the tongue is pinkish, I think the palate, the sort of soft palate that's visible, as well as the inside of his throat where the uvula would be, I think that should be a little bit darker. But for now, I think this is fine. Yep. Sorry, I hope you can see everything I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to move on to his rather impressive riding boots. These are the type that get that are longer maybe go above the knee, and then they get turned down in order to fit. So let's do a little bit of Nazdreg yellow on its own. Now I typically use Nazdreg yellow in combination with Seraphim Sepia to get that gold effect going on miniatures over silver. But in this case, just a reminder that Nazdreg yellow is an amazing color in its own right. And if you build it up in layers, just a little bit more than you normally would, more than one coat, you can actually get quite a nice brown color that has a little bit of, yellow personality to it, as opposed to, just your average snakebite leather kind of mid-brown that I typically tend to avoid, because it doesn't pull the model color temperature wise in any real direction. My preference is usually to go into a red or into a yellow, and to try to avoid neutral browns altogether, because neutral browns tend to vanish. So yeah, I like Nazdreg yellow when the majority of the model is already very warm, as is in the case of his armor. The Nazdreg yellow really provides quite a nice contrast in this case, and is very, very visible in a very pleasing way. So I'm going to drop some of this on. I didn't get to do the base today, so I will be jumping in to finish it off in my usual way, maybe after a blast or two from the hairdryer to speed things up, so that you don't need to sit through that process of me doing the bases. I guess every now and then I will do a base just to remind everybody how it's done, or at least how I do it. Yeah, so Nazdreg yellow for his boots, the leather turned down tops, quite nice in this color. Okay, a little bit of wicking to clear that area, and I think we're good. Okay, so that silver needs a bit of time to dry, and then after that we need to move into let's go ahead and do up the flat of his shield. So for this, I'm actually going to use snakebite leather, haha, and the reason is because I actually do want this part of the model to recede and not be too obvious. It's not a very big part of the miniature, it's just, the flat of his shield. It needs to look a little bit like wood and not clash, for attention from that very impressive orc sigil in the center. Not by accident have I chosen a death skull symbol, simply because I think even though this is Warhammer Fantasy and not 40k, a little bit of that looting kind of attitude comes across in this model, so would be a really, really appropriate choice for him to carry into battle. So this shield is clearly of Orc make. It isn't actually a Chaos Warriors, an ex-Chaos Warriors suit of armor, so to speak, or not something from his collection. So it's perfectly okay to do it in a way that would suggest that it's lower quality. So I like the idea that, yeah, this is just a ramshackle old piece of wood. Nothing, to really suggest like anything of a higher skill level. Most Chaos Warrior armor was actually made by Chaos Dwarves anyway. So the fact that their stuff is generally of higher quality than the Orc stuff, it's not really in question. It's just when you choose colors like this, it really kind of brings that difference to the fore. And that's what I'm trying to achieve. A little bit of the world building is suggested by the rather wonderful story of this Kev Adams masterpiece. So yeah, retro orc with modern shield for that reason, and Death Skull symbol, fully appropriate for the model in question, because this is in fact Ruglud's boss. Yeah, Ruglud's actually a rather unimpressive character. He's just a unit champion, yet I guess the regiment gets named after him because he's the guy marching at the head after all. Cool. Okay, so sorry, I seem to be wandering up a little bit. So let me just make sure that I move my camera slightly. And yeah, I think I need to take a little while to dry this off, so catch you in a bit. Hey guys, we're back. After a brief stint with the hairdryer. Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean by the base is done? Yeah, I know it's a big loss for all of us, but I couldn't make everyone sit through the process of me doing the base, and frankly, the hairdryer was right there. So if you really want to see me paint the base, you'll probably have to check one of the earlier videos. If not, maybe a short that I'll do sometime down the road. But I think somehow we'll get by. It was just a coat of Aggaros dunes, or rather my facsimile of Aggaros dunes over the surface, and a bit of leather brown around the side of it. I'm sure we'll survive without having seen that. Cool, let's move on. Let's jump in right away with cleaning up around the edges with more Flesh Terrace red. The bits that we were forced to be a little bit cagey with earlier because things weren't fully dry, we will now pick up with a little bit more Flesh Terrace red carefully around the edges. And yeah, I think that puts the Chaos armor in a good base coat place once we are finally done with this. So yeah, Ruglud's Armored Orcs. Really cool regiment of renown. In the later version, during I think it was 6th edition, it really turns into more of a crossbow unit. But at this early stage, Ruglud's Armored Orcs could be taken either as just... I guess the main feature was the fact that they were armored, rather than the main curio being that they were armed with crossbows. So they could either be armed with halberds or crossbows at this stage, and you could field them either way. The other sort of name that that Ruglud's Armored Orcs had, or at least I guess the name that the Orcs themselves used, was the Tin Can Commandos. Yeah, not quite the same ring, right? I guess. But I guess that's how an Orc would talk. So I guess world building wise, that made a lot more sense. Ruglud's Armored Orcs always did sound a little bit human to me, insofar as that would be the name that humans would have used, whereas Tin Can Commandos certainly sound a lot more orky, and in that sense, kind of makes a lot of sense from a world building standpoint. Cool. He's got 2 dead heads, and got a little bit of color on that, so let me just clean it off with a bit of silver gray. And we can come back to that later on. So, one more coat of Magos Purple in the mouth, and you can sort of see that Magos Purple has this amazing ability to realize many shades. Where it's fully concentrated, Magos Purple is this dark lavender color, which is really nice. And where it kind of goes over a lighter tone, like the tip of his tongue, for example, and kind of the soft palette going on in his mouth, you get that kind of much paler lavender color, and that's really quite pleasing to me, because you can get more than one color out of the same pot of paint. Therefore, you can sort of save on steps. Really, really nice idea. Cool. So let's go right ahead and mix some Gryphcharger Gray into some Skeleton Horde in order to get a desaturated gray tone that we can then use on the skull over there on this belt. I use this method whenever I want to make undead models that aren't too vibrant, because if there are plenty of models basically where having really bright colors on a skull will kind of throw off the color scheme a little bit, so I like to keep it dull in cases like this. In this particular case, I don't want it to kind of get in the way of what is overall a very dark miniature, because this armor is supposed to look like Chaos armor. So that helps me keep it in perspective. Next, silver. Probably we want to do the gold now, so we can go ahead and grab a little bit of my gold mix, which I've kind of lost on my palette. Fascinating. Okay, let me reach over and grab some more gold. And as always, this is a combination of Nazdreg Yellow and Seraphim Sepia, as you are no doubt sick of hearing by now. But in case you're not sick of hearing it, and this is actually the first video that you've ever watched, yeah, all of these recipes are actually spelled out in full in the video description. So in case I say this too quickly, you don't need to go back and kind of turn the video back just to watch it again. You can just go straight down to the video description below. And most of my most common recipes are dropped into there just for your easy reference. because I hope to make videos that would be useful to you in just your day-to-day painting. There are any number of, I guess, not signature colors that kind of coming out of Games Workshop Citadel contrast paint range. I don't really like out of the bottle, and I like to adjust a little bit to my liking. And for gold, for a wash over silver to turn it into gold, I think this is my go-to. I don't like the idea of using metallic gold paint simply because I think it comes across as very flat and one note. Why not get the shading done as well? And just the fact that you can tint your metals in different colors using this comes across as very pleasing to me. I don't know. I just like the way this comes out. Plus, it means I don't need to own another paint. Although, unfortunately, I do already own Retributor Gold. There you go. It's part and parcel of being in the hobby, isn't it? Having too many paints for some bizarre reason. Not having engaged my brain cells enough to come up with clever alternatives back in the day before I bought these. Oh well. Sometimes that's how it turns out. Okay, cool. So these studs, just to lean a little further into that cornate kind of theme, I'm going to put these rondelles in gold. This skull belt buckle as well at his groin area should be gold as well, because I think that's very reminiscent of a chaos color scheme. You see that I've done the same to the hilts and pommels of both of his scimitars. And yeah, I think the color scheme is starting to come together a little bit. Very appealing indeed. Next, it might be time. You know what? I think I missed the spot cleaning up. His dagger, he appears to have one of those little wormies. If you've ever worked with metal models before from back in the day, you know exactly what I mean. The wormies are to be purged at any opportunity. Really, what wormies are actually sort of leftover bits and bobs from the casting process. Essentially, what they are is a little noodle of metal that kind of gets produced whenever, I guess, from the spin casting process, molten metal gets driven through the little air vents that are drilled into the molds in order to allow air to escape and for the metal to fill the mold more completely. Sometimes these little air channels get filled up by molten metal itself, and as a result, when the model is pulled from the mold, you end up pulling this noodle of metal out as well. So yeah, we call them wormies, and they are a hassle because they can be quite hard to spot on a shiny metal pewter figure, and sometimes you only spot it when it's too late. And whenever you take a knife to get rid of it, to prise it off the surface, my god, it takes an entire chunk of the color of it as well. So yeah, wormies, damn them all to hell. Death to all wormies, I say. Okay, cool. So just a little bit of touch up with Nazdreg yellow over his boots, and I think the color scheme is coming along rather nicely. I think a little bit more snakebite leather, just to concentrate a bit of color around the margins of this icon on the back. It can be lighter as it gets around to the circumference of the shield, but where it meets this icon in the center, I think I would like for it to be a darker shade of brown. Nondescript but not uninteresting is how I would like to put it. And then we can go right ahead and fill in that belt, I think is our next port of call. So I imagine this would probably be black. Again, it's not really an area that I want to draw too much attention to. So maybe let's grab a little bit of Black Templar and drop that on. This I think I can probably also use for what should be a hair squig, although with that shape it looks dubiously like real hair, unfortunately. Now that I think about it, don't hobgoblins have real hair? They kind of have lank strands of hair, so maybe not all greenskins are bald. Well, orcs certainly seem to be. But yeah, that's true. Hobgoblins have hair. Oh man. Does that make them closer to us humans? Ew. They are more upright. Ew. More conniving. Not very orky. I think I'll leave that thought where it is. Cool. I'm gonna grab a bit of red, put on some highlights onto the extremities of the armor. Not too much. Just a little bit. Sorry, can you see? Just a little bit to enhance the shapes of the armor. I live in perpetual fear that, one day I'll record a video where everything that I do is just completely off camera. I pray this isn't the video that's happened. Because the truth is, as I paint this, it's a little bit hard for me to tell what's actually being recorded onto the camera. So I'm kind of just doing my best here to try to make sure that I always keep it in shot. I know I haven't always succeeded in doing it, so I beg your patience. But trust me, there are aspects of recording while painting with my current setup which are less than ideal. And maybe if this goes on for a while more and I do a good enough job with this, I'll get the chance to improve my rig. And in the meantime, I'd love to hear suggestions. If there are aspects of my delivery or just my general approach to making videos that you think I could do better, I would love to hear it. Sometimes making videos like this is really just screaming into the void. It's a little bit hard to know what members of the public like you guys think. Do the videos work in concept? Do they not work? Are you getting enjoyment out of them? So far, most of the comments, if not all the comments that I've received have been extremely complimentary. And I thank you guys deeply. It's been wonderful, honestly. This has been one of the highlights of, I guess, my creative expression. I've really enjoyed this process so far, and I hope to do it for as long as I can. There we go. So if you haven't already subscribed, or left a like or left a comment, please do so. It really helps a lot. I now know why all content creators say that phrase, because my goodness, it helps a lot. And everything that I put up onto YouTube is being scrutinized by YouTube, frankly, for its relevance, its content value, and just its affinity. It has an affinity score. And the more you like, comment, subscribe, and interact with the video, the more that affinity score goes up. So if it isn't too difficult, or if you genuinely like the video, well, I hope it's not too much to ask that you actually like the video, or say something, or even if you don't like the video, let me know in the comments what you think, so that I can improve the format and hopefully do better videos in the future. Would love to hear what miniatures you'd also like me to paint, because I have an inexhaustible love for all of these miniatures, but maybe there's something in particular that you wish I would paint, and I can break that out. I can do a bit of research to find out about it, and I can share what I find on this channel. Otherwise, I hope you're enjoying yourself and you will continue watching. So yeah, onwards with, what's his name again? Gudruk. Really doesn't roll off the tongue. Ruglud, so much better as an orc name, right? Ruglud has personality. Ruglud. Gudruk sounds... it sounds like you're eating a frog. Gudruk. Yeah, kind of like a bad swallow, if you know what I mean. Cool. Chainmail gloves. Kind of nice how he clearly hacked these off the arms of another Chaos Warrior corpse, judging by how raggedy they are. And then he's got the swords on the end of them. So yeah, these models really do have a little bit of... They appear to have a bit of thought put into them, the way they are designed, and that's really nice. I really like how chaosy the armor looks. I think it kind of fits the groove. But yeah, as far as my own gaming is concerned, you're probably wondering why I'm painting an orc. when I'm supposed to be painting Chaos Dwarfs, right? And of course, the reason is quite simple, because I intend to use these orcs as orcish slaves for my Chaos Dwarf faction. Chaos Dwarfs need an endless supply of orc slaves to drive into the mines, and the head canon that I'm choosing to go with, I suppose, is that Gudruk has done a good job by his Chaos Dwarf masters and has been rewarded by some armored originally destined for Chaos Warriors, just to show, just as a token of his favor among the Chaos Dwarf masters that he serves now, and hopefully that will keep him from being assassinated, or maybe it might cause him to be assassinated by his fellow orcs. But yeah, it's a token of appreciation from Chaos Dwarves. Hence, the armor resembles that worn by Chaos Warriors, and just the fact that it's a little bit raggedy and kind of damaged and so on. I think that fits, that ties wonderfully into the story, because I really don't think Chaos Dwarves will give an orc, their better work, I suppose. They're kind of like mean, spiteful creatures. So I would imagine that the Chaos Dwarf who gave this armor to Gudruk would probably have picked, some motley array from his hand-me-downs or damaged pieces. It's kind of rejects from his forge. And Gudruk here wears it with pride because it keeps him alive, plus it identifies him as part of his Chaos Dwarf Master's favored inner legion, inner circle, so to speak. Yeah. Or at least that's my headcanon, and I'm sticking with it. Because otherwise, this model looks a little bit too independent, I suppose, to be working for the Chaos Dwarves. But I kind of like the idea that they're all slaves, and they're just looking for, they're with the Chaos Dwarves for as long as they need to be, but they all have designs on breaking out and doing their own thing, Spartacus style, at some point. And it makes sense, therefore, that these guys would not get along whatsoever with the hobgoblins, my beloved hobgoblins, traitorous dogs as they are. Yeah. Just some really cool world building in the whole process of putting together this Chaos Dwarf force, and it's been very enjoyable so far. Plus, it's allowed me to paint Gudruk. Almost hit Ruglud. Damn it. Okay, cool. So I'm going to work on his teeth. I'm using dark sand because, well, I want the look to be a bit yellow, because this is in fact an orc, and Zarnagran doesn't have the best health dental care plan. I mean, you do have job security, I suppose. I don't think they're ever gonna like run out of the need for slaves anytime soon. So job security is fine. Free time, perhaps not so much, and dental plan pretty low on that list. But them's the breaks. You do what you can. Let's drop in a bit of ice yellow into his pupils. I did previously drop a bit of Magos purple into the eye socket to start with, just to prime that area to set it up. And I think this should do nicely to add a little bit more personality into his face. I think he's looking good. I can really make out the blind, unrelenting rage. Next, I think I want to take a little bit of the original Striking Scorpion Green, mix a bit of a highlight into it with silver grey, and start to do a little bit of touch-ups, like that awful bit on this cheek that's been bothering me. It's just a little patch of Flesh Terrace red that I kind of wasn't too careful with. And sort of a little bit around his eye ridges, upper lip. And some people like to add a bit of flesh tones into things like elbows and knees. I mulled this over. I honestly considered doing it for this model, but at the end of the day, I think I might not do it because, well, here's the reason. So because we overthink everything on this channel, so his knees Okay, I would totally do this if his knees were completely exposed. But because his knees are not completely exposed, they run the risk of looking like another material if I were to add a bit of human flesh tone to sort of give it that raw, bruised, or rubbed look. So I'm not going to do that for this model because it would confuse the issue. It might make that little pop of green for his knees look a lot more like it was part of his boots or something if I added the bone color. So yeah, that's my reasoning. Sometimes, yeah, I think it's dangerous to paint by rote because sometimes the geometry of the surface of the model or just the way it's been designed, the choices that the sculptor has made can dictate your color choices in a way that really we should take into account if we want the model to read well visually. By read, what I mean is that you can tell the details, you can tell the individual components, and you can understand the sort of visual language of the model, the geometry of it, the shape, the relief, and so on. So yeah, as much as I really wanted to have that worn out look on his knees, especially since this is an orc that's in Chaosdorf servitude, sorry to say, I imagine they do a lot of kneeling because Chaosdorfs are kind of dicks that way. But yeah, I guess this will have to do. So I think he's looking pretty good, pretty handsome, if a little bit froggy. Which is just how this sculpt is, isn't it? He does look a little bit froggy. So I want to come in with a little bit more Nuln oil to darken his chainmail loincloth, as well as to do his hair squig thing. Yeah, so this goes over his loincloth, his groin cloth, and then his top knot. I considered adding another color, but I decided not to because I think I want to keep it simple and readable. Let the red be the primary source of color on this miniature. And then of course I need to touch up a little bit that I missed, because this model is full of angles that are easy to miss if you're not careful. So as a general rule, I like to twist and turn the miniature. As you paint more and more miniatures, I think you get a pretty good feel for which parts of the model you're likely to miss. So I was painting with a friend yesterday, just taking him through the basics of working on a model, and we were painting a bunch of space wolves, space wolf dogs, specifically the Fenrisian giant wolves, and he was trying to work out how I knew certain areas would not be covered in paint correctly. I guess where we were likely to have missed areas, and I think experience taught me that if you've ever painted anything four-legged like a wolf or a horse or a dog or anything like that in miniature form, more than likely you're going to miss the area between its legs, like its chest, so to speak, simply because it's very easy to lose track of those while you're working on them. I guess it's just one of the benefits of having painted so many miniatures in my lifetime, and many more, no doubt, health willing. So yeah, I guess I got very used to checking under paws, like in between, like its limbs, its belly, and so on. It just became second nature to go look for imperfections in those areas. I have a bit of warp lightning out here on the palette actually, and I think I might use that to deepen, like just sort of enhance some of the facial features that Gudruk over here has. I keep wanting to call him Ruglud. Ruglud's right on the tip of my tongue. Slightly awkward, but well, there you go. Never really want to have an orc on the tip of your tongue. Tastes bad. So, a little bit of Warp Lightning, which I find is the perfect counterpart to Striking Scorpion Green. I really like Striking Scorpion Green for its vibrancy, and this color, which is Warp Lightning, seems to be the perfect shading color. It is in the same family of colors, and seems to work really well within that spectrum. It adds a little bit more blue to the mix, like a bluish green to the mix, but I think that works really well with the colors that you get out of Striking Scorpion Green. So yeah, really nice choice there. Plus, I think it's the right level of depth to really convey some, shape and structure to this horrible fellow. Cool. So, a little bit more of the Striking Scorpion Green with white for highlights. Well, it wasn't white, it was silver grey for highlights. And a bit of a cleanup around the extremities. And I think his face is looking pretty bad / good. Good in a bad, well, bad in a good way. No hands to highlight, unfortunately, so we won't get to do our usual knuckle trick. But there you go, them's the breaks. Sometimes they do be like that. Yeah, fellow kids. Okay, so a little bit more of this. And I think that should have covered up that little error. I do love it when a highlight successfully covers a sort of over like a mistake, like a bit of a splash. Something very satisfying about a highlight being like of fixing the problem without taking a step to fix it. I really like these moments. Yeah, I know, riveting stuff. But that's the price we pay for me getting rid of basing, so that you don't have to watch that every time. I'm going to put, so that was Plague Bearer flesh. I am going to drop in a little bit of our skull mixture into his socket, because I kind of want it to have the same kind of rotty look. Rotty is the technical term. Rotness. Rottish. And actually, I think he's beginning to look real good. I just want to come in with a little bit more of a highlight, just to really sharpen up the edges of the armor, make sure that the armor doesn't get missed. Although, honestly, how could it get missed? It's far and away the most exciting thing. And I think just the visual of an orc decked out in like high quality armor looks really, really imposing. There's something really, at odds with the concept of an orc being this barbaric warrior, that when you sort of see them decked out in heavy armor, they kind of look really extra imposing, really scary, and really intimidating, because he was bad enough when he was a barbarian warrior, but when he gets actual good equipment, an orc becomes a real threat. Kind of like its natural potential for violence is magnified. So, a little bit more of this gold wash onto these rondelles that I missed on his back. On both sides. And then I need to mull over what to do for his knife, his dagger. Truth is, from the back you can barely see the red, so maybe it needs to be red as well. So back to our puddle of Flesh Terrace red, and this is why I love wet palettes, because it allows you it allows you so much more working time. And this is coming from a guy who lives in the tropics already, right? Singapore is like 100% humidity is not rare. In fact, it's par for the course in Singapore. I can't imagine what it must be like to paint somewhere where humidity is particularly low. Doesn't your paint just dry instantly? I mean, that's got to be a pain in the ass, right? Like how many times do you need to keep getting paint out onto your palette if it tends to dry instantly? And if you leave your pots open, or if you paint directly from the pot, heaven forbid, doesn't that just mean that your paint over time wears out really fast? Doesn't it just dry out really badly? Kind of sad, but yeah, I get why you do it though. But yeah, consider a wet palette. They're good. They save you a lot of brain cells. Okay, so I think, you know what? The last thing he has is this potion bottle on the back, which I think I'll just run over in Warp Lightning Green. So back in the day, potions were really common in early Warhammer. So it doesn't surprise me at all that he has a potion here on his belt. But because it's mostly hidden, I think we can still keep it fairly dark. The last thing I want to do is to push the highlights on the armor just ever so slightly more. So I'll add a bit of ice yellow to push up the brightness without losing saturation. So that's a thing that ice yellow or dawn yellow, I suppose, if you're sticking to the Citadel range, is really good for. It's basically really good for increasing the brightness without losing saturation, because adding whites or adding bone has a tendency to take away quite a bit of saturation from it, so or move it into a completely different spectrum. So ice yellow for highlighting warm colors really helps to leave a little bit of color still in the underlying base coat. It doesn't sap it completely of saturation, while still allowing you to hit good bright highlights so that you capture that dramatic flare, as is the case of his armor right now, which is starting to look real good. A little bit on that dagger on the back. And I think I am happy to leave him right here. Maybe okay, I say that, but I think the skull needs a little bit more of a highlight around the edge, just to make it look kind of bony and weathered. Bit of his face. Now all I need to do is to get him a small unit of dogs' bodies in the employ of the Chaos Dwarves. But I think this lad is looking good. Bit of highlight on his hair. And I think he's looking pretty good. What do you guys think? Maybe a bit more. So this is that endless back and forth that I'm so increasingly doing on my miniatures, as I find ways to kind of make the glorious painting process last a little bit longer, because it's really so much fun to come in and adjust all these little details. But yeah, it really makes a difference when you have a nice fade on your weapons as opposed to just patchy Nuln Oil wash. That added little bit of direction from having that shaded metal. It's not like these weapons even have a fuller, to be perfectly honest, but you kind of want to support the geometry. You want to enhance the geometry of the model to make sure that it looks dangerous and sharp, even if it's a little bit battered. And to be fair, he is in a YMCA pose, and he does have quite interestingly shaped scimitars. Well, one of them you could call a scimitar, the other one, not sure. Kind of like some kind of a stabby dagger. Very un-orky, but I guess that's the point. So clearly his shield is of orky make, but these daggers are not. So a little bit more Nuln Oil just to make sure that the rivets get picked out. Nice and visible. The null oil that I'm using, the Nuln oil that I'm using is basically old Nuln oil, which would have a little bit more black in it. So you could just put a little bit of Black Legion into your Nuln oil to get it to match the effect of Nuln oil from this period. Well, not from this period. There wasn't any Nuln oil when this model was made, but you get the idea that I'm using essentially. And yeah, I think that's good. I'm very pleased with the way he looks. I think he's a handsome boy. A bit of silver would really help shine up the edges, right? Really make it look sharp and dangerous. This is a dangerous model. I can see myself spending a lot of time on this model potentially. Just adding little nicks and scratches and little dents and dings, just to make him come to life a little bit more. But for now, I think, yes, this time for sure. I think I am happy to call it at this point. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. As I happily reach for more paint. Sorry, I do this quite a bit. Hope you don't mind. So what I'm doing is actually worth discussing because I'm highlighting to the point of leaving the red spectrum because I think it makes the model look slightly worn. Yeah, okay, so I promise that's it. I'm done. I'm happy with the way he looks. Guys, this is Gudruk Bone Thrower, Ruglud's Armored Orcs. War Chief, his boss essentially, and the guy who basically assigns Ruglud his job from the original Ruglud's Armored Orc kit back from 1987, sculpted by Kev Adams. Have a good one, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.